Hi there, I'm Saremy from Sew, and today I'm going to show you how to sew fold over elastic using your Coverstitch machine. And I'm going to be using two different styles of fold over elastic. I have this one right here that is already folded. It comes this way, just like this. So it has a right side with a little decorative edge, and then it is folded already. And I'm going to be using this very much cheaper version that isn't folded already, and you fold it as you go, just like this. I got this one from Minerva.com and this one from Amazon. And I'll be doing it on this micro-lycra fabric here and some cotton knit. They're both very stretchy and they're both cut on the cross grain, just straight pieces. But at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to sew this into a circle, like a leg hole or an arm hole or something like that. And this right here is just going to be showing you how to get it onto the fabric. All right, and you can see these are the examples here. So this is the pre-folded and then the stuff you fold as you go. And this is what it's going to look like when it's done. So I'm using a Juki MCS 1500, and right now I have the upper thread set at the tension between 3 and 4, and the length is at 4 and the differential is at N, which is normal. So that's what we're going to do, and let's get to it. All right, so I'm going to start with this pre-folded stuff. This is actually stuff I really like this. It's really soft and it's easy to put on. And you want the tail of your elastic to be coming off so that the fold opening is facing to your left. All right, so that the elastic's going to be on the inside of the machine and the fabric's going to be on the outside. Rather, the other way would be using the elastic with the fold facing that way, and then you'd have to have your fabric on the inside of the machine and the elastic on the outer edge, and it depends on how much your throat space is here, but that would kind of make it pretty difficult for some projects. So I say start with it with the elastic on your right hand side with the fold facing your left. All right, so if you want, you don't need any pins or clips to do this. It does seem a little scary and a little bit like, how is this going to happen? But you don't really need any pins. I don't recommend using them. But if you want, you could, stick your fabric in there, line it up, and maybe just sew a little stitch across the end there with your regular straight stitch machine if you want. But I'm not going to do that, just so you can kind of get the hang of it. All right, so it's a little awkward at first. I get it kind of positioned in here. My Coverstitch lets me do this. So my presser foot's already up, but I can even lift it up a little higher. And I really love that feature. So I'm just going to position it in there. And if I need to kind of move things around, I always use an awl because I can kind of stab things and move it. All right, and so we're going to put that presser foot down. And the key to this is to just gently pull the fold over elastic. There isn't really a formula. Once you've sewn a lot of your own underwear or whatever you're doing, you could probably figure out how much fold over elastic am I using per pair, how much am I stretching it, and pre-cut it if you like. I recommend not pre-cutting it because it's really hard to manage pre-cut little pieces. I do that and sometimes I'm like, why did I do that to myself? So what I recommend is kind of gently stretching the elastic a little bit and then putting your fabric in there. Let me hold it up a little closer here. So stretch it a little bit. The fabric isn't stretched, lay it in there and then hold it just like this. And then it's going to want to kind of snap in there once you're holding this. And you're going to start sewing. Keep your left needle on the elastic. You don't really want to straddle the edge. You can set your needles further apart, but I find the narrow is just fine. It just depends on the width of your fold over elastic. And then do the same thing, just kind of keep going. I'm kind of doing really small sections so you can kind of see what my hands are doing, but stretch it a little bit. And it just stays in there. And you'll find that curved edges sometimes are even easier, and that's just because they are kind of curving around the elastic already, kind of on the interior. So if I could do this whole long piece here a lot faster if I just stretch it a little bit. and then I close it over it just like this. Get that right lined up, get that in there, and then I hold it stretched out so that the fabric isn't stretched, but the elastic is. It'll snap in there. And you just want to make sure, just check in a little bit, like, oh, is it really still in there? Yep, it is. All right, when I get to the end on my particular machine, the way I lock the cover stitch is I go one stitch forward and then backward, and then I can lift up the presser foot and pull, and it's not going to come unraveled. Yours might be a little different. My old one, I didn't have to do all that. It just was locked already. All right, look at that. Not too bad. I did the contrast thread so you can kind of see. So then you have your 2 needles on there and your cover stitch on the back. All right, let's try the other elastic. We're going to unravel a little bit, and make sure that you keep your project on top of your table. Nothing's pulling off and kind of pulling against the needles. The key with doing any kinds of stretch in your serger or your cover stitch or any machine really, if you're stretching the item, make sure that you stretch the item before you start sewing and don't stretch it during. You can keep it stretched. So in other words, if I have this stretched out, as long as I hold it like that and put it through the machine, it's not pulling on the needles. You don't want to put it in there, start sewing, and then pull, because you can bend your needle, and that can be really dangerous for you and your machine. All right, so this stuff is a little bit fiddlier, but it's not too bad. It is narrower as well. So I like to lay it in there just like this, wrap it around. Sometimes, you know, it'll get hung up on your feed dog. So yeah, I lift up my presser foot. I get my awl in there. And you know, sometimes you can even start sewing before you even get to your garment. But in general, you're probably sewing something like an underwear leg hole and you don't have that option. All right, let's get it going and then kind of get everything arranged. And same thing, you're going to gently pull this a little bit, and it's going to look less like it's snapping around it, because see, it kind of bends out like this, but that's okay. You're just going to hold it down and it's going to go right through there. Pull a little bit, so I'm pulling a little bit, not the fabric, just the elastic, and I hold it stretched while it goes through so that it's not pulling on the needles. So we'll just do a little bit more so you can see my hands, and then I'm going to do this really long piece here that's like 8 inches long. Because this is, when you start getting the hang of this, you can really put something together really quickly using fold over elastic, since you're doing the entire step in one. All right, same thing, one stitch forward, one back, up, and then I can pull it out, just like this. There we go. All right, this fabric's very, very stretchy, so let's try the cotton lycra since it kind of rolls a little bit and see how we feel. I see I stab it all the way through. See that? I stab it all the way through and then just push it in there. Get it a little bit situated. I even swipe it so that it's not hung up on a needle or the opening of the presser foot there. Because right now I can see it's kind of curling up there. Let's make sure it's not going to get pushed against and then pop out. All right, so we get it going a little bit and do the same thing. This fabric's usually a little easier. It's not as slippery as that micro-lycra can be. Oh, that kind of time I slipped a little bit. So let's see how it looks. If your machine doesn't have that kind of lock stitch, you can just pinch it and then pull, and then you should be okay. All right, so yeah, I fell off right there. It's still secure though, so it's up to you if you wanted to take that out. You probably really can't even see it. So no one else will be able to either, especially if it's in the crook of your, hip bone, All right, so let's try the other style on the cotton. Pull out a little bit of length. Make sure it's not twisted because that'll just be kind of a headache. Open it up. Lay it in there. And feed it in. You'll see I use my awl for just about everything. I love having an awl. It's like having a nice pointy finger that's not going to get sewn. All right, so gently pull your elastic, put it in there. So the cotton is a little grippier, especially since the inside of this is a little bit softer, and so it's a little grippier. So it wants to still go in there, but you do kind of need to nudge it a little bit. But it's really nice because it stays put a little bit easier. So I'm going to stretch out this whole length. So I'm stretching the elastic, not the fabric, and then it snaps in there. And you can see I never check the other side. As long as I know it's under the top layer, it's definitely on top of the bottom layer. And that's because it's already pre-folded. All right, let's look at this. Very good. All right, so how do you do this in the round? Okay, so say you have a pair of underwear and you want to finish that leg hole. So I have a whole video on how to sew a pair of underwear. This is more of a technique on how to put it in the round in a circle, because you probably put it on when the garment was flat, right? So that's how I did this one here. I sewed my crotch panel to the front and back of the underwear, and then my side seams were open, just like this. And I put my leg elastic on, and then I'm going to show you how I did this right here. I sew the side seam here, and then I put my waist elastic on, and then I top stitch the elastic down. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I find that this is the flattest way, most low profile way to do it, and the most comfortable. So, and I think that that's kind of important to note. And if you look at a lot of ready to wear underwear and things like that, when they're using fold over elastic, they do end up putting it in a seam. So the other style of elastic that's narrower, it's also a little bit thicker. It doesn't seem like it until you see it on the garment. So if I wanted to sew this one in the round, putting this seam together here is a lot thicker than putting this seam together here. And it's also, since it's a narrow bump, I find that sometimes some sergers are better than others. The serger is going to have a tough time grabbing these two layers and keeping them even here. So if you have that trouble with your serger, what I recommend doing is taking it to your straight stitch machine and sewing through just the end here to keep it one on top of the other, so that you can keep your ends flush here, and then you'll have a nice, smooth transition between your edges here. And I like to do that all the time. I do it often. Sometimes I just don't really want to have to fight things, so I make it as easy as possible. And I think that's totally fine. We're making our own clothes. We can do whatever we want, right? So if we're doing this kind of elastic here, I like to serge the seam together like this. This is my serger. I'm using a Juki MO1000, and I have the tension a little bit lighter. This fabric it's very, very pliable, so it wanted to scrunch up a little bit. I have my width here at 2.5, 4.5, and my length right at the normal. I have all these other things on the right hand side at the normal and neutral position, and my uppers are all about in the 3 range, 3 a little bit plus on the left hand needle. All right, so here we go. We're going to put this on here. Like I said, stitch across here if you like. You might see I might get this a little bit uneven now. I really like to place it in there. Now if I'm not trimming anything off, I could actually push this all the way back to my needles so that I'm starting to sew on it, right? Just like that. And I only have like a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I could do that here. If you're gonna trim, you're gonna need to push this up all the way to your blades there. And remember, you just want those edges as nice and flush as possible. All right, so we got our presser foot down. We're going to put all these little threads. I didn't really get my cover stitch all the way to the edge there, so let's just push those. And maybe I should trim a little bit there. All right, and now we're going to start sewing. And you can see it's getting a little hung up, so I lift up my presser foot, let it relax, and then the elastic bounced to the back there. And now it's starting to sew. And the same here. Now if you find you're having some trouble, you can use your awl, kind of stab this in here and kind of keep it flush, something like that. I don't recommend using pins. And then give yourself a tail before and at the end of the seam so that you have something to fold back into the seam. So here we go, we have a tail before and after the seam, and I'm going to tug it a little bit, and we'll just trim it to, you know, like a 1/2 inch long. And then we may want to tug it again. Sometimes I do get this little bit of a mess there, and that is a little harder to wrangle, I'm not going to lie. All right, so let's get this trimmed. All sergers act completely differently, and you just got to kind of know the strengths and weaknesses of yours and just work around them. All right, so now we have this side seam here, and you could leave it, but I don't recommend leaving it because it's going to come undone eventually, and it just doesn't look very good. So the first thing I like to do is I like to fold back the tail of the thread in the seam allowance, and I stitch it down with my single needle machine, right? And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to top stitch the seam inside the width of the elastic, and I'm going to press that seam towards the back of the underwear or the garment. All right, let's do that. All right, so we're here at my straight stitch machine here, and now we have this side seam that we want to deal with here. So like I said, we're going to take this little tail. This is the front of my garment, this is the back. I'm going to bend it into the inside of the garment. And you see how I have this kind of messy thing right here? I'm going to try and bend that in there and stitch it down as well. Now I'm stitching only in the seam allowance, so this isn't going to show on the outside of the garment. And we're just really just taming this tail. I do this a lot in just woven garments as well, even when I'm not doing a elastic band. All right, so we just want to secure that. Now get rid of this tail here. Get rid of any of this floppy stuff here that might sneak out. If you need to do it again, do it again. Look at the other side, trim that little back stitch thread, and now let's do it on this one too. Really pull that tail. This one's a little short. We're just going to hold it, pull it really tight. You'll start noticing that this is how they sew a lot of the underwear, and this is how we always finished a lot of our insulation for outdoor clothing. They would really secure the seams and make them as flat as possible to make it as comfortable as possible. All right, so here we are. This is the back, this is the front. And now on the right side, now if you want to do it from the wrong side because you want to be able to see where you're sewing, I understand that. Personally, I have found in my experience that most machines stitch nicer, the stitch looks nicer from the top side. So do with that what you may. Just know that if you're just pressing it that way, I think you're going to do okay. If not, you can stitch it from this side. So the thing you want to watch out for, I actually did an amazingly good job at this. I'm actually kind of surprised. So sometimes you're going to get this little corner kind of winging out past your edge here. So try and pull the elastic over it. And I really will. I'll pull this over like this and just kind of secure it in there. The elastic will do what you tell it to do. Now you're just going to sew this seam, and I'm just going to do it only in the width of this elastic here. And remember, my seam allowance is pressing towards it, and we're just going to do a little forward and back, just something to make that look nice and flat. And you trim your back stitch threads, and we'll do the same up here. And sometimes I even kind of pull it a little bit, make sure it's nice and stretched. It makes it a little flatter. You might even find holding the tail of your thread as you sew will make the underside stitching look a little nicer. All right, so I still have a little bit of a mess there. We won't worry about that. It's our first one of the day, right? All right, and so now we have these side seams that are finished. This looks very professional. If you have a cover stitch and a serger, you can make your underwear look completely store-bought. It's pretty easy. There you go. Good luck. Happy sewing. Let me know how your project went in the comments. I love to hear it. And if you like what you see, subscribe. I have lots more how-tos, especially with knits and elastic and using your serger and cover stitch alone to do these things.